Deep within the archives of the British Library, tucked behind centuries of recognized kings and conquerors, lies a shadow. For over 1,000 years, a name has been systematically excised from the chronicles of the realm. We are told of Alfred the Great, of William the Conqueror, and the Tudor line. Yet history remains curiously silent regarding the woman who held the crown when the foundations of the nation were most fragile. Her name was Ælfswyth, the Unspoken, a monarch whose very existence was deemed a threat to the patriarchal lineage of the Anglo-Saxon throne. Today, we peel back the layers of intentional obscurity. Britain in the late 9th century was a land of fragmented kingdoms and constant Viking incursions. It was a world of cold stone, damp forests, and the ever-present smell of wood smoke and iron. Within this volatile landscape, the Kingdom of Mercia struggled for identity against the rising dominance of Wessex. Ælfswyth was born into this chaos, a princess of a line that would soon be subsumed. She was not meant to rule, merely to be a bridge between warring houses. However, the sudden death of her husband and the absence of a male heir left a vacuum that only she was bold enough to fill. The coronation of Ælfswyth was not a grand affair held in a cathedral before thousands. It was a desperate, clandestine ceremony held in the damp undercroft of a Mercian chapel. By the flickering light of tallow candles, she was anointed with oil by a single loyal bishop who risked heresy to honor her claim. There were no cheers, only the heavy silence of the stone walls and the fearful glances of a handful of loyalists. This was the moment she became the first queen regnant of a unified English territory, a title the chroniclers would later work tirelessly to bury under the weight of tradition. To the powerful ealdormen of Wessex, a woman on the throne was an aberration, a defiance of the natural order that threatened their own grip on power. In the smoke-filled halls of Winchester, they gathered in secret. These men, clad in heavy furs and silver-edged tunics, spoke in hushed tones about the Mercian problem. They viewed Ælfswyth not as a leader, but as a temporary placeholder to be removed once a suitable male figurehead could be installed. The seeds of her erasure were planted here, amidst the dregs of ale and the flickering hearth fire, long before her reign had even truly begun. Ælfswyth was no naive puppet. She understood the precariousness of her position and spent her days poring over maps and tax records, strengthening the defenses of her border towns. She spoke multiple languages and maintained a network of informants that reached as far as the Frankish courts. While the lords expected her to spend her time in prayer or needlework, she was busy redefining the administration of her kingdom. She was a ruler who understood that knowledge was more potent than the sword, a realization that made her even more dangerous to those who wished to see her fail. The primary architect of her downfall was Bishop Wulfstan, a man who believed that the divine right of kings was strictly male. Wulfstan was a master of the written word, and he controlled the scriptoriums where history was recorded. He saw Ælfswyth's competence as a threat to the church's influence over the crown. Every victory she won against the Danes, every bridge she built, Wulfstan attributed to her male advisors in his records. He began the slow process of editing her out of the present, ensuring that the future would have no memory of her leadership, creating a narrative of a vacant throne. In the scriptoriums of the great abbeys, the work of erasure began in earnest. Scribes were ordered to scrape the vellum of existing chronicles, removing Ælfswyth's name and replacing it with the interregnum, or the name of her deceased husband. The physical act of deleting a person from history was a laborious process of ink and knife. These monks, working under the flickering light of tallow candles, were the foot soldiers in a war against memory. Thousands of pages that once bore witness to her reign were sanitized, leaving behind nothing but ghosts and the faint indentation of letters that no longer existed. As the political pressure mounted, Ellsworth found herself increasingly isolated. Her allies were bribed or intimidated into silence. She walked the ramparts of her capital, watching the horizon not for Vikings, but for the messengers of her own kinsmen who sought her abdication. The weight of the crown became a physical burden, yet she refused to step down without a fight. She knew that her struggle was not just for her own status, but for the very idea that a woman could hold the sovereignty of Britain. In the gathering darkness of the 9th century, she was a solitary flame. A secret meeting was convened in the bowels of a derelict Roman villa. Ellsworth met with the few remaining loyalists, who had not yet been turned by Wulfstan's gold. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and desperation. They plotted a final stand, a legal challenge to the Witan that would force the lords to acknowledge her reign. It was a gamble of the highest order. If she failed, she would not just lose her throne, she would be branded a traitor and a heretic. The shadows of the ancient ruins seemed to press in on them, echoing with the ghosts of forgotten empires. The morning of the Great Council arrived with a biting frost. Ellsworth entered the hall, not as a supplicant, but as a monarch. She carried the ancient sword of the Mercian kings, a symbol of her lineage and her right to rule. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Bishop Wulfstan stood ready with his scrolls, prepared to argue that her rule was a blight upon the land. This was the precipice of her legacy, the moment where the path of British history could have changed forever. But the machinery of silence was already in motion, and the doors of the hall were barred to all but her enemies. Ellsworth stood in the center of the great council hall, the heavy oak doors groaning as they were barred shut. The sound of the iron bolt sliding home echoed like a death knell. Before her sat the Witan, a semicircle of stone-faced men draped in heavy furs and silk. The air was thick with the scent of tallow candles and damp stone. She gripped the pommel of the Mercian sword, its hilt cold against her palm. No supporters stood behind her. The seats usually reserved for her loyalists were pointedly empty, replaced by the shadows of the vaulted ceiling. Bishop Wulfstan rose from his seat, his robes rustling like dry leaves. He did not look at Ellsworth's face, but rather at the crown she wore. He unrolled a long, yellowed parchment, his fingers trembling with either age or hidden fervor. His voice, once a source of comfort to the court, now carried the sharp edge of a blade. He spoke of divine order and the natural law of kings, arguing that a woman on the throne was an affront to the heavens themselves. Every word was a calculated strike designed to strip away her legitimacy before the assembled lords. Ellsworth stepped forward, the tip of her sword ringing against the flagstones. She did not raise the weapon in anger, but held it as a witness. She reminded the council of the battles she had overseen and the peace she had brokered when the Vikings were at their gates. Her voice was steady, a sharp contrast to the bishop's trembling oratory. She spoke of her father's blood that ran through her veins, a lineage that predated the laws Wulfstan now weaponized. For a brief moment, the tension in the room shifted as several younger lords looked down in shame. The silence that followed her plea was more deafening than any shout. Ellsworth scanned the faces of men who had once sworn oaths to her in the heat of victory. Now they were statues of indifference. Lord Aethelred, her most trusted advisor, stared intently at his own hands, refusing to meet her gaze. The machinery of silence was not just in the locked doors, but in the hearts of those who feared the bishop's influence or coveted her power. She realized then that the council was not a trial of her merit, but a funeral for her reign. Wulfstan produced a second document, sealed with a crest that made Elswith's heart turn to ice. It was a forged lineage, a rediscovered chronicle that conveniently omitted her birth and replaced her with a distant male cousin who had been lurking in the shadows of the court. This was the final blow, the erasure of her very existence from the legal record. As the bishop read the names of the true kings, Elswith saw the scribes in the corner already dipping their quills into black ink, ready to rewrite the history she had lived through. With a gesture from Wulfstan, 2 guards stepped from the shadows. They did not draw their steel, but their presence was an ultimatum. They reached for the Mercian sword, the symbol of her authority. Elswith looked at the blade, then at the men. To fight would be to provide the blood they needed to justify her execution. Instead, she slowly loosened her grip. The heavy sword was taken from her, its weight leaving her hands feeling strangely light and vulnerable. The council watched in a collective, stifled breath as the symbol of her house was carried away. The decree was read. Elswith was to be stripped of her titles, her lands, and her name. In the eyes of the law, she would become a ghost, a non-person whose presence in the palace was a clerical error to be corrected. Wulfstan declared her rule an interregnum, a gap between kings. As the words were spoken, the great candles at the head of the table were extinguished one by one, plunging the hall into a suffocating twilight. She stood tall even as her world was plunged into darkness, the last remnants of her royal identity being systematically dismantled. The guards escorted her toward the rear exit, away from the grand entrance she had used only an hour before. This was the path used by servants and prisoners. As she walked, she passed the royal archives, where the sound of scraping metal reached her ears. Scribes were already using small knives to scrape her name from the vellum of the official chronicles. The dust of her legacy fell to the floor, to be swept away with the evening's refuse. Every step she took was a step further into an engineered oblivion, orchestrated by the men who feared her memory. Outside the hall, the biting frost had turned to a light snowfall, covering the tracks of her arrival. Elswith was led to a small, nondescript carriage waiting in the shadows of the courtyard. There were no crowds to witness her departure, no mourners for her reign. The palace walls, which had once felt like a fortress of her own making, now looked like the cold, indifferent ribs of a giant beast. She looked back one last time at the high windows of the council hall, where the light of her enemy's victory still flickered, casting long, distorted shadows onto the snow. As the carriage wheels began to turn, grinding against the frozen gravel, the great council continued its business as if nothing had happened. Inside the hall, a new name was already being written into the king list. The Queen of Mercia was being transformed into a rebel widow or a pious consort in the margins of the text, her agency stripped and her voice silenced. The erasure was nearly complete, but as Elswith clutched a small, hidden signet ring beneath her cloak, she knew that while they could burn the scrolls, the memory of her rule would remain a hidden ember in the frost. The carriage eventually slowed to a halt before the iron-bound gates of St. Werburgh's, a remote nunnery nestled within the desolate marshes of the east. The air here was heavy with the scent of salt and damp earth, a far cry from the incense-filled halls of the royal palace. As the heavy gates creaked open, Elswith looked back one last time at the road leading to her lost capital. She was no longer a sovereign. To the world outside, she was a ghost entering a tomb. The transition from the throne to the cloister was silent, marked only by the tolling of a single cracked bell. Inside the damp stone walls, the ritual of stripping away her identity began. The abbess, a woman whose face was a map of stern lines and ancient secrets, accepted the royal escort's decree without a word. Elsweith's fine silks and fur-lined mantles were replaced by the rough, undyed wool of a postulant. Each layer removed felt like a piece of her history being peeled away. Yet, as the heavy monastic robes settled on her shoulders, Elsweith felt a strange sense of fortification. They had taken her crown, but they had given her the shadows in which she could disappear and survive. While Elsweith settled into the silence of the marshlands, the Great Council's work continued with terrifying efficiency back in the capital. In the scriptorium of the palace, monks bent over their desks, their pumice stones scraping across the surface of expensive vellum. They were not writing new laws, but deleting old ones. With every stroke of the blade, Elsweith's name was erased from charters, replaced by generic titles or the names of the men who had betrayed her. The ink of her reign was being turned into dust, swept onto the floor and forgotten by the very men who had once sworn her fealty. Life in the nunnery followed the rigid rhythm of the divine office, but Elsweith's mind remained sharp and restless. During the long hours of manual labor in the scriptorium, she observed the young novices copying the holy texts. She realized that the church held the ultimate power over memory. If she could not rule with a scepter, she would rule with a pen. Beneath the floorboards of her cell, the signet ring remained hidden, a cold reminder of the authority she still claimed in her heart. She began to plan a different kind of resistance, one that would outlast the men who sought to bury her. Weeks turned into months. One evening, a hooded messenger arrived at the gates, claiming to be a traveler seeking shelter from the winter gales. Under the cover of the midnight prayers, he slipped a piece of parchment into Elsweith's hand. It was a report from the capital. The new king, her nephew, was struggling to hold the fractured alliances she had once balanced so carefully. The borders were fraying, and the Viking threat was returning to the northern horizons. The kingdom was beginning to realize that the rebel widow they had discarded was the only one who truly understood the art of war. The message was more than news. It was a plea from those few who still remembered her strength. But Elsweith knew that returning to the capital as a warrior was impossible. Her battle was now one of preservation. She sought out Brother Osric, an aging monk at the nunnery who had once served her father. Together, in the dead of night, they began a secret project. While the palace scribes erased her, Osric and Elsweith began to write. They recorded the true history of Mercia's defense, the battles won, and the treaties signed by the queen the world was being told never existed. In the royal court, the atmosphere was far from the pious victory the council had expected. The new king sat upon a throne that felt increasingly unstable. Without Elsweith's diplomatic networks, the Danelaw lords grew restless, sensing weakness in the young ruler. The council members, once unified in their misogyny, began to bicker amongst themselves for the spoils of her lands. The golden age they had promised was turning into a winter of discontent. They had removed the architect of their peace, and now they were watching the walls of the kingdom slowly crumble around them. Back at the nunnery, Elsweith took on a young apprentice, a girl named Edith, who showed a rare talent for the art of illumination. Elsweith taught her more than just how to grind pigments or gild letters. She taught her the history of the land, the lineage of queens, and the weight of a crown. She was sowing seeds in the mind of the next generation, ensuring that even if every scroll in the capital was burned, the oral tradition and the hidden books would carry the truth. The queen was no longer a ruler of land, but a ruler of secrets. The years bled into one another, and the memory of Queen Elsweith began to fade from the public consciousness. To the common folk, she was a legend whispered by the hearth. To the nobles, she was a cautionary tale of overreaching ambition. Snow fell heavily over St. Werburgh's for many winters, each layer of white burying her deeper in the past. Her hair turned the color of the frost, and her hands grew gnarled like the roots of the marsh oaks. But her eyes remained sharp, always watching the horizon for the change she knew would eventually come to the kingdom she loved. One final act remained. In the deep of a bitter January night, Ellsworth led Brother Osric to the most remote corner of the nunnery's library. There, behind a loose stone in the foundation, they placed the completed Secret Chronicle of Mercia. It was wrapped in oiled leather and sealed with the wax of the signet ring she had carried for decades. As she slid the stone back into place, Ellsworth knew her physical presence was nearing its end. She had been erased from the official books, but she had buried the truth where the stones themselves would guard it until a more enlightened age discovered it. Winter's grip tightened around the nunnery. Ellsworth spent her final weeks by the hearth, her hands gnarled and frail. She no longer spoke of the throne or the crown she once wore. She had become a ghost before her time. Brother Osric remained her only confidant, witnessing the quiet dignity of a queen who had outlived her own identity. Outside, the winds howled through the stone cloisters, a cold reminder that the world she had shaped was moving on without her. Her eyes, once sharp with political strategy, now held only the peaceful glow of the embers, reflecting a life lived in the shadows of power. On a silent Tuesday in late February, the light finally left Ellsworth's eyes. She died not as a monarch, but as a nameless sister of the order. Brother Osric stood over her, a single candle flickering in the drafty room. He knew the protocol. There would be no state funeral, no marble effigy, and no bells ringing across the kingdom. She was to be buried in the common plot, her grave marked by a simple wooden cross that would rot within a generation. The queen who had unified Mercia was passing into the earth as if she had never existed at all. Weeks later, the king's inspectors arrived at the nunnery. They were grim men, tasked with the final erasure. Led by a royal clerk, they moved through the scriptorium, cross-referencing names and dates. Every mention of Ellsworth in the local registers was carefully scraped away with sharp pumice stones or blotted out with heavy ink. They were thorough, searching for any scrap of evidence that she had sought refuge here. To the world outside, the records now showed only a vacancy where a queen's life should have been. The state's memory was being rewritten, and the silence was becoming official. Decades turned into centuries. The nunnery, once a bastion of learning and prayer, began to succumb to the relentless march of time. Roofs sagged under the weight of moss, and the library's stone walls grew thick with ivy. The loose stone in the foundation, however, remained undisturbed. Behind it, the leather-wrapped chronicle rested in the dark, shielded from the damp and the rot. While the world above changed, kings rose and fell, and the language of the people shifted. The hidden truth of Ellsworth remained in stasis, a silent witness waiting for the light of a different age. The Viking Age brought fire and steel to the shores of England. Raiders swept through the valley, their war cries echoing where chants once rose. The nunnery was plundered for its silver, and the wooden structures were put to the torch. Smoke filled the sky, and the sisters fled into the woods. Yet, the stone foundation of the library survived the conflagration. The heat of the fires did not penetrate the deep cavity where the chronicle lay. The invaders took the gold, but they missed the most valuable treasure of Mercia, buried beneath the ash and the blood of the fallen. By the year 1066, the landscape of power had shifted again. Norman knights rode across the Mercian fields, bringing new laws and a new tongue. The ruins of the old nunnery were now just a curiosity to the local peasants, a place where spirits were said to walk. A Norman lord considered building a manor over the site, but the ground was deemed too unstable. The stones were scavenged for other buildings, yet the corner of the library foundation remained buried under mounds of earth and fallen masonry, a forgotten tomb for a forgotten queen's legacy. The 16th century brought the Great Dissolution. Henry VIII's commissioners arrived to claim the final remnants of the monastic lands for the crown. They dug through the ruins, looking for hidden caches of wealth or lead from the roofs. They pried up flagstones and knocked down walls with iron bars. One man stood inches from the hidden stone, his hammer resting against the very foundation that held the secret chronicle. He sensed a hollow sound, but was called away by his master before he could investigate. The secret held by a thread, protected by the whims of fate. In the Victorian era, the site became a place of study for early antiquarians. Men in top hats and heavy overcoats wandered the mounds of earth, sketching what they believed were the footprints of an ancient chapel. They spoke of great Alfred and the legendary kings, never mentioning a queen named Elswith. They walked right over the spot where her heart and her history were buried. To them, the site was a romantic ruin, a puzzle with missing pieces they didn't even know were gone. The earth kept its silence, the chronicle remaining dry and dark in its stone shell. The 21st century arrived with the hum of technology. A modern archaeological team, equipped with ground-penetrating radar and digital mapping, began a systematic survey of the forgotten site. They were looking for the lost heart of Mercia, driven by a hunch that the official histories were incomplete. As the radar pulses traveled through the soil, they struck something unusual, a density anomaly within a surviving section of the foundation. The lead researcher stared at the screen, seeing a rectangular void that didn't match any known architectural plan. The hunt for the truth had finally begun in earnest. The excavation was meticulous. Under the watchful eyes of the team, the earth was brushed away layer by layer until the ancient foundation stones were exposed. The lead archaeologist reached out, her fingers tracing the seam of a loose, square stone that sat slightly askew from the rest. With a heavy crowbar and a bated breath, the team pried the stone loose. Behind it lay a bundle wrapped in blackened, oiled leather, sealed with a wax crest that had not seen the light for over a millennium. The silence of Elswith was about to be broken. The archaeologists carefully transport the bundle to a portable laboratory tent, away from the biting wind. The lead researcher, wearing blue nitrile gloves, begins the delicate process of peeling back the layers of blackened, oiled leather. As the outer skin falls away, it reveals several sheets of thick, yellowed vellum, remarkably preserved by the airtight seal. The air in the tent grows heavy with the scent of ancient lanolin and dust. This is not a mere religious text. It is a personal record, hidden with the intent of surviving a purge that had successfully erased every other trace of its owner from the history of Britain. Upon the first page of the vellum lies a secondary seal, a disc of hardened red wax depicting a unique heraldic device, a stag entwined with thorns, resting beneath a crown that predates the Norman conquest. This symbol does not appear in any known royal lineage of the period. The lead researcher's hands tremble slightly as she realizes the magnitude of the find. This crest belonged to a queen whose reign was so systematically scrubbed from the annals that even her name was thought to be a myth. The wax is perfectly intact, guarding the secrets of a lost sovereign who refused to go quietly into oblivion. As the modern team analyzes the ink, the narrative shifts back 1,000 years. We see Elswith, the forgotten queen, sitting by a flickering tallow candle in a stone-walled chamber. The air is cold, and her breath mists in the gloom. She writes with a frantic yet precise hand, her quill scratching against the vellum. She knows the king's men are destroying the library and the tapestries that bear her likeness. She is a woman racing against a tide of deliberate silence, recording the true events of her regency before the doors are broken down and her identity is confiscated by the crown. The internal conflict of Elswith is etched upon her face. She had ruled with wisdom and strength during the king's long illness, yet the court's patriarchal structure viewed her power as a stain to be bleached from memory. Every word she pens is an act of rebellion. She details the treaties she signed and the battles she commanded through her generals. She knows that by hiding this chronicle within the very foundations of the abbey, she is placing her only hope for justice in the hands of a distant, unknown future. Her legacy is no longer about power, but about the simple, fundamental right to exist. A shadow falls across the doorway of her scriptorium. It is her most loyal scribe, a man who has risked his life to bring her the materials needed for this secret work. They exchange no words. The silence of the room is a shield against the spies that roam the corridors. He watches her with a mixture of grief and reverence. He is the witness to her erasure, the one who will eventually help her secure the bundle within the foundation stones. In this moment, they are the only two people in the kingdom who hold the truth. Two flickers of light against an encroaching historical darkness. Outside the chamber, the political machines of the 10th century are already in motion. Men in heavy woolen cloaks gather in the great hall, whispering of a new lineage that will exclude Elswith entirely. They speak of her as a temporary necessity to be discarded. The visual of their conspiratorial faces, lit by the orange glow of a hearth, contrasts with the cold blue light of Elswith's solitude. The decree has already been signed. All coins bearing her image are to be melted, and all charters bearing her signature are to be burned. The erasure is not a mistake. It is a calculated political execution. The night the chronicle was hidden was one of freezing rain. Elswith and her scribe moved through the muddy construction site of the new abbey, their footsteps muffled by the storm. She held the leather-wrapped bundle against her chest like a child. They found the hollowed-out space behind the foundation stone, a secret known only to them. As the scribe applied the mortar and slid the square stone into place, Elswith pressed her hand against the cold granite. She whispered a final prayer to a god she hoped would one day allow her name to be spoken again. The stone settled, and the silence began. Centuries bleed into one another in a rapid montage of shadows and stone. Above the hidden chronicle, the abbey rises, falls into ruin, is rebuilt, and eventually collapses during the Reformation. Generations of monks, soldiers, and peasants walk over the very spot where Elswith's life story lay dormant. The earth shifts, and the roots of ancient oaks wrap around the foundation, but the oiled leather remains unyielding. The silence of Elswith is a physical weight beneath the soil, waiting for the precise moment when the technology of man would finally catch up to the secrets of the past. Back in the present, the translation team uses multispectral imaging to reveal the faded ink without touching the fragile vellum. As the digital screens flicker to life, the first lines of the chronicle emerge from the darkness. The language is Old English, rhythmic and archaic, but the message is clear. I, Elswith, Queen of the Angles and Protectress of the Faith, write this so that the light of truth may pierce the shadow of my husband's brothers. The room goes silent as the researchers realize they are reading the voice of a woman who has been legally non-existent for over 1,000 years. The discovery sends shockwaves through the academic world. The name Elswith begins to appear on news tickers and headlines across the globe. For the first time since the 10th century, her name is spoken aloud, vibrating through the air of the modern world. In the lab, the lead archaeologist looks at the final page of the first section. It describes a betrayal so profound that it changed the course of the British monarchy forever. The mystery of why she was forgotten is beginning to unravel, revealing a web of murder, theft, and a stolen crown that had been hidden in plain sight for a millennium. As the archaeologist's gloved fingers trace the faded Latin script, a name emerges from the depths of the parchment. Edwig. He was the brother Ellsworth trusted most, yet the text reveals he was the architect of her downfall. To consolidate his own claim to the throne, Edwig orchestrated a campaign of character assassination that began moments after their father's death. The manuscript details a secret meeting held in the dead of night, where Edwig bribed the chroniclers to strike Ellsworth's name from the official lineage. This wasn't just a family feud. It was a cold, calculated effort to rewrite the very soul of the British monarchy. Through the lens of the document, we are transported back to the 10th century. A cold, gray morning at Winchester reveals the coronation that history forgot. Instead of Ellsworth standing beside her brother, she is seen in the shadows, guarded by men whose loyalties had been bought with silver. Edwig stands alone before the altar, the crown descending onto his head. The air is thick with the scent of incense and betrayal. The nobles, once sworn to Ellsworth, avert their eyes, complicit in the silent theft of a birthright. The crown itself seems too heavy with the weight of the lie being forged. The erasure was systematic. In the scriptoriums of the great abbeys, monks worked by candlelight, their knives scraping away the name Ellsworth from every official scroll and genealogy. The manuscript describes the Great Silence, a period where any mention of the Queen was punishable by excommunication. We see the ink being rubbed raw, leaving only faint, ghost-like indentations on the vellum. This was an early form of information warfare. By removing her name from the records, Edwig ensured she would cease to exist in the memory of the people. The past was being scrubbed clean of its rightful heir. Back in the present day, the discovery of the manuscript leads the team to a forgotten corner of an ancient cathedral. Behind a crumbling stone wall in the crypt, they find a hidden chamber that hasn't been opened in 1,000 years. Dust motes dance in the beams of their flashlights as they reveal a series of murals covered in grime. These paintings were never meant to be seen by the public. They were a secret record kept by those who still remained loyal to the forgotten queen. The lead archaeologist realizes they are standing in a tomb of truth, hidden beneath layers of sanctioned history. The central mural is breathtaking. It depicts Ellsworth not as a villain or a ghost, but as a powerful, sovereign ruler. She is shown holding a scepter and a book of laws, symbols of her intent to reform the corrupt systems of her time. Her face is rendered with striking realism, her expression one of grim determination. This was the woman the chroniclers tried to bury, a visionary leader whose ideas threatened the power of the church and the greed of the nobility. The discovery of her true likeness sends a chill through the researchers. They are looking at the face of a lost era. The manuscript continues to tell Ellsworth's personal story from her final days. Imprisoned in a remote nunnery, she did not spend her time in prayer, but in writing. She used the very tools of her suppression to record the truth, hiding her pages within the bindings of other holy books. The narration reflects her internal strength. Even as her world narrowed to the four walls of a damp cell, her mind remained fixed on the future. She knew that one day, the stones would speak. The flickering candle she wrote by symbolizes the small, fragile light of truth that Edwig could never quite extinguish. The conspiracy deepened as the religious authorities of the time, led by the influential St. Dunstan, threw their weight behind Edwig. Dunstan feared Ellsworth's secular reforms would diminish the church's land and wealth. In secret chambers, the cross and the crown conspired. They crafted a narrative of heresy and madness to justify her removal. The documentary tone of the manuscript captures the cold pragmatism of these men. They weren't just protecting a king. They were protecting an empire of tithes and influence. Ælfswith was an obstacle to their divine right to rule, and she had to be dismantled piece by piece. Her crime was not treason, but progress. Ælfswith had drafted plans to redistribute monastic lands to the common people to stave off famine, a move that would have revolutionized the English social structure centuries ahead of its time. The manuscript contains detailed maps and ledgers, showing her meticulous planning. These documents prove she was a sophisticated administrator, not the weak figure historical footnotes occasionally suggested. The motive for her erasure becomes clear. She was a revolutionary whose success would have cost the elite everything. Her memory was killed to save their fortunes, leaving a void where a golden age should have been. In the modern laboratory, the lead archaeologist compares the description of the stolen crown in the manuscript to the official crown of the period housed in the Tower of London. To her horror, she realizes the official crown is a clever forgery, or rather, a modified version of Ælfswith's original. The gems had been swapped, the engravings polished away, but the structural frame was the same. The current narrative of the British lineage is physically resting on an object that was stolen from the Queen they tried to forget. The very symbol of authority is a testament to the crime committed a millennium ago. The realization settles over the research team like a heavy shroud. They aren't just looking at an academic curiosity. They are uncovering a foundational lie. If Ælfswith was the rightful queen, then the entire line of succession that followed Edwig is technically built on a usurpation. The documentary-style narration emphasizes the gravity of the situation, the potential to delegitimize 1,000 years of history. As the sun sets outside the lab, the face of Ælfswith on the computer screen seems to watch them, waiting for the truth to finally be told to a world that was never supposed to know her name. The revelation causes a ripple effect through the research facility. If Ælfswith's reign was legitimate, then the entire West Saxon lineage was altered by a calculated act of treason. The team pores over the genealogical charts, seeing the branching paths of history differently now. Every monarch who followed Edwig was, in the eyes of the ancient law, a successor to a coup. The weight of this discovery is more than academic. It is a seismic shift in the British narrative. They realize that for a millennium, the story of a nation has been built upon a foundation of silence and carefully constructed shadows. The scene shifts back to the 10th century, into the heart of a cold, stone-walled council chamber. Here, the architects of the erasure are at work. Men in heavy wool robes, their faces obscured by the flicker of low-burning tallow candles, methodically scrape ink from vellum pages. This was not a sudden act of violence, but a slow, bureaucratic execution of a legacy. The documentary voiceover explains that the most effective way to kill a queen was to remove her from the written word. In the flickering light, we see the physical labor of forgetting, as names are replaced and dates are shifted. As the ink is scraped away, the image of Ælfswith in a royal manuscript is deliberately defaced. A heavy iron nib crosshatches over her eyes, and a wash of dark pigment covers her crown. The narration describes this as the Great Redaction. It was a systematic purge across every scriptorium in the south of England. The records were altered to show Edwig as the sole successor to the throne, airbrushing his sister queen out of existence. The visual captures the violent precision of this erasure, turning a vibrant historical figure into a smudge of charcoal and ink on a forgotten page. In the present day, a senior historian travels to a remote, wind-swept ruins of a Saxon-era chapel in the Wessex countryside. This site was once a prominent abbey, now reduced to crumbling limestone and overgrown ivy. The documentary tone shifts to the atmosphere of a cold case investigation. Beneath these stones, records suggest a secret vault was sealed during the late 10th century. The historian moves through the deep shadows of the arches, the dramatic lighting of the setting sun casting long, skeletal fingers across the ground. They are looking for the physical evidence that the written word tried to destroy. We flash back to a lonely coastal cliff in Cornwall, where the exiled Queen Elswith is said to have spent her final years. The wind howls through the rocky crags as she stands looking toward the east, toward the kingdom that was stolen from her. The narration reflects on the psychological toll of being a ghost while still alive. She was a woman who knew she was being erased from the world's memory even as she breathed. The visual focuses on her silhouette against a churning, dark gray sea, a figure of tragic dignity lost to the margins of history. Back in the 10th century scriptorium, a young monk hesitates as he is ordered to destroy a specific ledger. This ledger contains the records of Elswith's charitable acts and her signatures on royal land grants. The documentary explains that not everyone was willing to follow the order of erasure. Some, out of a sense of divine truth or quiet rebellion, hid fragments of the truth. We see the monk carefully wrapping a small scroll in oiled leather and sliding it into a hollow space behind a loose stone in the monastery wall, a secret message sent across 1,000 years of time. In the modern lab, the team discovers a hidden digital layer within the high-resolution scans of an old charter. It is a palimpsest, a document where the original writing was washed off and written over. Under infrared light, the ghostly outlines of Elswith's signature begin to emerge beneath a mundane tax record from Edwig's reign. The narrator emphasizes that the truth is often written in the shadows. The researchers watch in awe as the faint, elegant script of the forgotten queen reappears on their monitors, proving that the physical evidence of her existence survived the centuries of suppression. The documentary takes us into a reconstruction of what Elswith's coronation would have looked like. It is a somber, majestic affair held in a candlelit cathedral. The narration describes the ritual, the holy oil, the heavy crown, and the oath to protect the people of Wessex. This scene represents the moment of her greatest power, just before it was stripped away. The visual is rich with detail, showing the intricate embroidery of her robes and the flickering light on the faces of the silent nobility. It is a portrait of a legitimate sovereign whom history would soon brand a non-entity. As the researchers compile their final report, they face a new challenge: the realization that some institutions may still want this secret kept. The documentary notes that the current royal lineage and the historical establishment have a vested interest in the official version of the past. The weight of their discovery begins to feel like a burden. In the dark office, surrounded by stacks of books and glowing screens, the lead researcher looks out at the city lights of London, wondering if the world is truly ready for the foundation of its history to be rewritten by a ghost. The team prepares to upload their findings to a global server, ensuring the truth can never be erased again. The narration concludes this segment by reflecting on the nature of history. It is not just what happened, but what we choose to remember. Elswith's face, reconstructed through forensic data and ancient descriptions, appears on every screen in the room. She is no longer a smudge on a page or a whisper in a dusty archive. As the upload progress bar nears completion, the queen who history tried to forget is finally, irrevocably, stepping back into the light of the modern world. The upload pulse ripples across the globe, a digital siren call announcing the return of a ghost. In darkened offices from London to New York, historians and enthusiasts watch as their screens flicker with the reconstructed face of Queen Elswith. The silence of centuries is broken not by a shout, but by the steady hum of data streams. For the first time, her name is being typed into search bars by the thousands, bridging the gap between the Dark Ages and the digital era. The truth, once buried under layers of earth and lies, is now an unstoppable sequence of light. In the hallowed halls of Oxford, an elderly professor stares at his tablet in disbelief. The textbooks he has taught from for 40 years are suddenly, fundamentally incomplete. He looks up at the portraits of kings lining the walls, realizing the shadows between them held a power he never dared to imagine. The weight of this revelation is heavy. It challenges the very foundation of British royal genealogy. Elswith's emergence isn't just an addition to history. It is a correction of a 1,000-year-old error that had been accepted as absolute, unshakable truth. We travel back in time to witness the moment of erasure. A stone carver, acting under the cold gaze of Elswith's successor, raises a chisel against a royal monument. With every strike, her name is chipped away, reduced to dust that scatters in the wind. This was a deliberate act of Damnatio Memoriae, a systematic attempt to kill her spirit after her body had already failed. The chisel marks are deep and jagged, a physical manifestation of political spite. The history we know was written by those who held the hammer, carving their own glory over her silenced legacy. Back in the present, a museum curator carefully removes a small brass plaque from an exhibit of 9th-century artifacts. The old label, which read "Unknown Royal Consort," is placed into a drawer, never to be used again. In its place, a new, meticulously engraved sign is mounted. It simply reads, "Queen Elswith, Sovereign of the Unspoken." As she adjusts the lighting, the artifacts in the case, a broken comb, a silver brooch, a rusted key, seem to vibrate with a new identity. They are no longer nameless curiosities. They are the personal effects of a recognized monarch. The data revealed that Elswith was not merely a figurehead. She was a master of diplomacy in a time of constant warfare. We see her in a council chamber, surrounded by grizzled warriors who underestimate her. She points to a map, her strategy clear and decisive. While the men sought glory through the blade, she sought stability through alliances and trade. Her reign was a period of uncharacteristic peace, a golden thread woven into a tapestry of blood and iron. This was why she was feared by those who followed. Her intellect was more dangerous than any sword. The chroniclers of the time, mostly monks in isolated scriptoriums, were the gatekeepers of memory. We see one such scribe, his hand trembling as he omits Elswith's deeds from the Great Chronicle. He follows the orders of a king who demands that the history of the realm be a story of men alone. The ink pools like a dark secret on the page, covering the truth of the queen's brilliance. For centuries, these biased accounts were the only source of knowledge, turning a vibrant leader into a hollow void in the records of the British Isles. At the archaeological site, the atmosphere has shifted from academic curiosity to profound reverence. The mud-caked ruins where her remains were discovered are now being protected by a permanent structure. Archaeologists work with soft brushes, uncovering more of the floor tiles she once walked upon. There is a sense that the ground itself is breathing a sigh of relief. The discovery has turned a forgotten patch of earth into a national monument. Every fragment found is a piece of a puzzle that is finally coming together, restoring a lost chapter of the British soul to its people. In the quiet of the night, the ruins of the abbey where Elswith was last seen seem to pulse with a spectral grace. The narration suggests that her spirit, once tethered to the world by the injustice of her erasure, can now find rest. She is no longer a ghost haunting the archives. She is a queen restored to her throne in the collective memory of the nation. The moon shines through the broken arches, casting light where there was once only shadow. The narrative journey of her rediscovery is nearing its end, having successfully fought back against the tide of oblivion. Years later, we see a classroom of students watching a documentary on their tablets. The lesson is no longer just about Alfred or Ethelred. It begins with Elswith. The children look at her image with a sense of wonder, seeing a woman who stood tall in a world that tried to shrink her. The impact of the team's work is fully realized here, in the education of the future. The erasure has been reversed. By teaching her name, they ensure that she can never be forgotten again. History has become a living, breathing dialogue between the past and the present. The segment concludes as we see the final resting place of the digital data, a secure vault beneath the British Library. Here, the story of Elswith is etched into glass and stored in a vacuum, protected from the elements and the whims of future tyrants. The screen fades to black on an image of her reconstructed crown, a symbol of a legacy that survived a millennium of silence. The queen who history tried to forget is now the queen who history will always remember. The light of truth has finally chased away the shadows of the 9th century forever. With the data secured, the name of Queen Elswith began to ripple through the halls of academia. No longer a footnote or a whispered ghost, she became a subject of intense study. Lectures at Oxford and Cambridge now feature her name alongside the great kings of Wessex. Scholars re-examine every charter from the 9th century, looking for the telltale gaps where her name was scratched away. The silence of the past has been replaced by the vibrant discourse of the present, ensuring that her political genius is finally understood by a world she could never have imagined. Digital reconstructions allow us to see her as her contemporaries did. Using the latest forensic techniques on the few skeletal remains found in the hidden crypt, artists have rebuilt her visage. She is not the frail victim historical erasures suggested, but a woman of sharp intellect and formidable presence. In the eyes of the reconstruction, we see the steely resolve of a queen who governed through the darkest years of the Viking invasions. Her face, once lost to the decay of time and the malice of men, now stares back at us with an undeniable authority. The concept of Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory, was used as a weapon against her. For centuries, the missing lines in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle were a void that no one dared fill. Now, technology acts as a bridge across that abyss. Infrared imaging reveals the faint indentations of her name beneath the ink of those who tried to overwrite her. Each letter of Elswith restored is a victory over the tyranny of the past. The physical evidence of her erasure has become the very map that guided us back to her identity and her rightful place in the royal line. To understand Elswith is to understand the harsh landscape of the 9th century. It was a world of mud, blood, and constant vigilance. She navigated a court where power was as fluid as the tides of the English Channel. Her survival for so long, and her ability to maintain her household's influence, speaks to a political acumen that rivaled her male counterparts. We see her now as a pioneer of statecraft, managing the internal politics of Wessex while the external threat of the heathen army loomed over the horizon like a storm that would never break. Her story is a cautionary tale for the modern age, a reminder that history is often written by the victors and edited by the vengeful. The erasure of Elswith shows us how easily a life of significance can be reduced to nothing through the selective preservation of records. but her resurrection proves that truth possesses a resilience of its own. It can wait for 1,000 years in the dark, buried under stone and dust, only to emerge when the right light is shone upon it. She is the embodiment of the enduring human spirit against the forces of oblivion. In the newly opened Ellsworth Gallery, the artifacts speak where voices cannot. A small silver thimble, a heavy iron key, and the fragments of a silk veil. These personal items were found in the silt of the river near her former manor. They provide a tactile connection to a woman who was, for so long, only a ghost. Visitors stand in silence, moved by the weight of these mundane objects. They are the fragments of a life interrupted, now gathered to tell a story of resilience. The gallery is a sanctuary where the Queen's humanity is finally allowed to breathe. The rediscovery of Ellsworth has sparked a cultural renaissance. Poets and novelists find in her a protagonist of unparalleled depth, a woman who held the threads of a kingdom in her hands while her own name was being unraveled from the weave of time. She has become a symbol for all those whose voices have been silenced by history. In the quiet of their studies, writers now give her the words she was never allowed to speak. Through fiction and verse, the emotional truth of her life is being explored, filling the gaps that the chronicles left behind. The ruined abbey, once the site of her greatest humiliation and her final hiding place, has been transformed. It is no longer a place of forgotten shadows, but a monument to the endurance of memory. Archaeologists continue to sift through its soil, finding more clues to the daily life of the Queen and her loyal retinue. The stones themselves seem to exhale a sigh of relief, as if the burden of keeping a secret for 10 centuries has finally been lifted. The site is now a place of pilgrimage for those who value the truth over the convenience of a curated past. Ultimately, Ellsworth's return to the light reminds us that the past is never truly dead. It is merely waiting to be rediscovered. Every generation finds the history it needs, and today we need the story of the Queen who refused to be forgotten. Her life is a testament to the fact that power, while it can destroy records and silence witnesses, cannot ultimately kill the truth. The light of inquiry has pierced the veil of the 9th century, and what it revealed was a woman of extraordinary strength who shaped the foundations of a nation. As our journey through her life concludes, we are left with a final image of Ellsworth, not as a ghost or a victim, but as a sovereign. She stands at the threshold of history, her legacy secured for all time. The shadows of the 9th century have finally receded, leaving her name etched in the hearts and minds of those who seek the truth. The Queen who history tried to forget is now the Queen who history will always remember. Her crown may be glass and digital light now, but her spirit remains as enduring as the very soil of England. The camera pulls back from the 9th century, the golden wheat fields of Wessex morphing into the stone-cold archives of the British Library. For over a millennium, Ellsworth's existence was whispered in the margins of ecclesiastical texts, a shadow without a name. But as the ink of the modern age meets the dust of the old, the silence is finally broken. Scholars sift through fragments of vellum piece by piece, reconstructing the life of a woman who was once the beating heart of a kingdom. Her story is no longer a footnote, but a testament to the resilience of the female sovereign. An archaeological dig at an ancient abbey site yields more than just stones. It reveals the foundation of a lost history. Here, beneath the layers of Saxon clay and Norman stone, the presence of Ellsworth is felt in the very alignment of the walls. It is a slow, methodical process of unearthing a memory that was meant to be erased. As each artifact is logged, the mystery of the British royal past deepens, challenging the patriarchal narratives that long dominated the chronicles. The queen's influence, once buried under the weight of centuries, begins to surface like a long-lost treasure. What does it mean to be forgotten? For Ellsworth, it was a deliberate act of historical erasure, a political silencing that spanned generations. Yet, the land itself remembers. The hills of the West Country, the wind-swept plains of Mercia, and the banks of the Thames all bear the mark of her reign. Every ancient oak and every bend in the river carries the echo of her decrees. In the absence of written records, the geography of England becomes her witness, a silent partner in the preservation of a legacy that refused to stay hidden in the dark. We see the restoration of a royal seal, its intricate patterns being cleaned by the steady hands of a conservator. This is the visual confirmation of Ellsworth's authority, a symbol of the power she wielded alongside her husband. It represents a union not just of people, but of purpose. The seal, once crushed and discarded, now sits under a spotlight, its sharp edges and regal motifs reflecting a light that hasn't touched it in 1,000 years. It is the physical manifestation of her return to the royal canon, a bridge between the forgotten and the remembered. In the digital realm, artists and historians collaborate to give Ellsworth a face. Using forensic techniques and historical descriptions, her features emerge from a cloud of pixels. She is not a caricature, but a woman of gravity and intelligence. This digital reconstruction serves as a modern monument, a way for the 21st century to look into the eyes of the 9th. The semi-realistic depiction honors her dignity, stripping away the layers of myth to reveal the human being who navigated the treacherous waters of early medieval politics with grace and iron-willed determination. The narrative of England is changing. For too long, the story of the nation was told through the lens of its kings, while its queens were relegated to the shadows of the nursery or the cloister. Ellsworth's re-emergence signals a shift in our understanding of power. She was a strategist, a diplomat, and a mother to the future of the realm. Her life reminds us that history is not a static list of dates, but a living, breathing tapestry that requires constant re-examination. By reclaiming Ellsworth, we reclaim a vital piece of the British identity. As the mist clears over the ruins of an ancient Saxon chapel, a symbolic statue of Ellsworth is revealed. She stands tall, a book in one hand and a scepter in the other, representing the dual nature of her influence, education and governance. This monument is not made of stone, but of the collective memory of a people who have finally chosen to look back. The serious tone of the scene underscores the gravity of this moment. The queen, who was once a ghost, is now a pillar of the community, an inspiration for those who follow the truth. The final dawn of our story breaks over the horizon of a new era. The light touches the spires of modern cities and the ruins of ancient abbeys alike. This continuity of time is the true legacy of Ellsworth. Her story has traveled through the Dark Ages, survived the silence of the medieval chroniclers, and emerged into the light of the modern world. It is a reminder that truth, however deeply buried, has a way of finding the surface. The Queen's spirit is woven into the very fabric of the nation she helped to build. As we conclude this exploration of Ellsworth's life, we reflect on the nature of history itself. It is a fragile thing, often shaped by the victors and the vocal. But the quiet strength of those like Ellsworth cannot be extinguished forever. Her journey from the heights of power to the depths of obscurity and back again is a powerful metaphor for the human condition. We are all keepers of the past, and it is our duty to ensure that the voices of the forgotten are heard once more. Her crown, though invisible, remains eternal. The final image fades in, a single illuminated letter from a manuscript, the E of Elswith, glowing with a soft, regal light. Around it, the parchment texture of history remains, but the name itself is clear, bold, and undeniable. The screen slowly darkens, leaving only the name etched in the viewer's mind. The Queen history tried to forget is forgotten no more. She is Elswith of Wessex, Queen of the Anglo-Saxons, Mother of England, and a sovereign for all time. The mystery is solved, the legacy is restored, and the story is complete.